Mining with nature is not only an ambitious roadmap, it is the very first roadmap for increased biodiversity. By 2030, at the latest, the Swedish mining and minerals sector will contribute to a biodiversity net gain in all regions where mining and mineral operation take place. Why? Research provides irrefutable evidence that loss of biodiversity is just as great a threat to our planet as climate change. The mining and minerals industry cannot establish just anywhere. Mines can only be developed where ore and minerals are present. We therefore bear a great responsibility for the land we use, and we must prepare for the day when the land is to be returned to its natural state. For that reason, the Swedish mining and minerals industries have joined forces and created Mining with Nature. We apply the mitigation hierarchy. We will avoid and minimize negative impact. We will restore the environment to its natural order. And we will compensate for our actions. This roadmap was created in total agreement among our member companies, and we are proud. This ambitious effort takes time. That's why we already started. Mining with Nature.
Welcome back. Mining with Nature, as you heard, is our own Swedish developed concept to increase biodiversity. And the roadmap, like Kristina Branterud mentioned in the morning, can be found at the end of the hall over there. Talking about biodiversity, EU plays an important role here, especially what is processed and decided within the DG ENVI. That is Directorate General of the European Commission, responsible for environmental policy of the European Union. Therefore, we are very happy to have with us today the Director of Biodiversity at DG ENVI. He has served as Secretary of State for the Environment of the Portuguese government. He has also been advisor for environmental matters to the Prime Minister of Portugal. And he holds a PhD in evolutionary biology, just like the newly elected Swedish Nobel Prize laureate Svante Pääbo. So please welcome Humberto Delgado Rosa. So very welcome to Kiruna.
Well, thank you very much. I'm actually very keen to engage in your environmental summit because we do need the will, capacity, and indeed motivation that relevant business such as those in Svemin do have to help us on this holistic agenda of the green transition. So if I may go on, I would share some thoughts with you on biodiversity and how it relates to your activities.
The digital floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me first, to set a bit the stage, it's no novelty that science tells us for long that while humanity has developed, it has done so at the cost of degrading the biosphere. And we have actually, our activities have already crossed two so-called core planetary boundaries, climate change and biosphere integrity. So we do know also from science that our activity has been triggering what is the sixth great extinction comparable to other big extinction spasms of the geological record, and that we do face the risk of wider ecosystem collapse together with climate change. So this is in essence quite a big and structural risk and challenge. But for long, politics did not really move much around this. Yet now we have in the EU a European Green Deal as the main political tool to address this challenge. So one first thought, how come do we have a Green Deal nowadays? Well, my perception is that those risks and impacts that science has been warning us about, well, they are landing on us. And we all see in the summers, on the winters, a bit everywhere in the world, including Europe, the heat waves, the extreme weather events, the storms, the floods, the droughts, the forest fires. And everyone got very much also aware of some, let's say, non-climate related impacts, such as the prevalence of plastic in the ocean or the decline of insects in so many parts of the world, and Europe included. So in a nutshell, I do think that these invoices that nature is sending us have now hit public opinion. And through public opinion, and you are well aware, for instance, of the youth movement around climate change, but through this public opinion, it has also hit politics and policy making. So we do have the EU Green Deal, which is a political response to these societal expectations, and which we can see as a blueprint to tackle the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, while improving our common well-being and the resilience of society and the economy. The main point for me is that the Green Deal is holistic. It looks for common solutions, for win-wins and synergies between different goals, avoiding as much as possible trade-offs. That's what's enshrined, for instance, in the do no significant harm principle that is in the Green Deal. I would also say the Green Deal main novelty, it's not so much climate change. It does have more ambition on climate change, but that was already somehow in the political radar. But the Green Deal has brought to the same level of importance and attention, let's call it the rest of the environment. Circular economy, pollution, biodiversity brought up to the same level of importance, climate change, with which they are interrelated. So this has led to a rather ambitious biodiversity strategy for the EU to 2030, because there was this assumed goal of the EU living by example on biodiversity loss, as it has led on climate change. Actually, the EU can only lead by example. So we do have this ambitious strategy tackling the main drivers of biodiversity loss, bringing as much as possible quantified targets, be it on protection of nature, restoration, sustainable use of land and sea, reducing pressures of several kinds, addressing agriculture, forests, soil, rivers, cities, also financing needs, knowledge, nature-based solutions, engagement with business, etc. So in the end, this biodiversity strategy is relevant to show that the EU is committed to biodiversity action as it advocates to get at the global level in this upcoming summit of biodiversity scheduled for December, where the world should attain a new and more significant global deal for nature. Now, focusing a bit more on the biodiversity strategy and what it can entail for your interest, first, keep in mind that the biodiversity strategy was approved in May 2020. That was amidst the pandemics. And why? Well, it was not so difficult to show that there is a relationship between the risk of zoonosis as COVID-19 and the destruction of nature. So since then, since May 2020, there were quite many efforts of implementation and delivery. And I will just refer to some milestones that I presume can be more relevant for the mining sector. One of those is this goal to attain a coherent trans-European nature protection network that should encompass until 2030 30% of EU land and sea, 1/3 of which is under strict protection. And actually, we are not that far from that target of 30% on land, a bit more far away on the sea. On land nowadays, counting protected areas as Natura 2000 sites plus nationally protected areas, we are around 26%. On sea, we are dragging a bit before, but we do have guidance on the identification and designation of protected areas, and we are engaging with a process of national pledges with the member states that is ongoing. The second point is on soil. We did approve last year a EU soil strategy for 2030, which was foreseen in the biodiversity strategy. The general aim is to get to healthy soil ecosystems by 2050 under a no net land take situation, and with reduced soil pollution to levels that don't affect the health of people and ecosystems. Actually, the motto of the soil strategy is that soils do provide solutions for climate change mitigation, for adaptation, for water availability and quality, for food security, and for human health. And the soil strategy announces a soil health law. Actually, right now, the online public consultation is still running until 24th October, and we very much aim to get your views, concerns, and suggestions. And if I may, we are looking for good examples from the mining sector, examples of minimization, compensation, regeneration, including costs and benefits of such approaches that we may be willing to bring to us. And another deliverable I wish to refer to is the first ever proposal for an EU nature restoration law. It was also announced in the biodiversity strategy. It was approved in June 2022, so right amidst the crisis provoked by the Russian war on Ukraine. But we can easily demonstrate that nature does not stand in the way of food security, rather on the contrary, if you just think of pollinators and how much they are needed for food security. But this proposal does set targets to restore ecosystems, habitats, and species across EU land and sea, focusing very much on those ecosystems that deliver the most for climate mitigation and adaptation. And let's say with two strands within it, if you take a look, which is for those protected habitats and species that are already protected under EU law, well, the goal is to get to favorable conservation status up until 2050 with certain milestones, while for other kinds of ecosystems, non-protected, the goal is to get a positive trend in some indicators that are favorable for biodiversity as well as for resilience of such habitats. I wanted to highlight there's no goal whatsoever of excluding economic activities from areas to be restored. Actually, often this restoration by increasing resilience can help some economic activities. I have in mind, for instance, more resilient forests to forest fires. I'm thinking of my own country to begin with. And also it will, of course, aim at non-deterioration of the areas to be restored, but accepting exemptions as those on the basis of overriding public interest, which may apply to mining facilities, for instance, in the case of critical raw materials. I'll say a bit more on critical raw materials in a moment, but this principle of overriding public interest pre-exists in the EU legislation on nature and water, for instance. So now just to give one step back into the wider context before I end up, I actually think that probably we have a single structural and prevailing crisis instead of several, which is the crisis of global unsustainability. Arguably the challenge of the century, because we have a closing window of opportunity to reset the balance, to come in with far-reaching transformative changes to the way we produce, we consume, we trade, and we live. And that's actually what the Green Deal aims at, which is a transformative and holistic change, leaving no one behind, resetting the balance so as to preserve an inevitable and hospitable biosphere for all of us, with a resilient society and the economy. Of course, now on critical raw materials, they are very crucial for this goal, for the green and digital transition. So we need very much a steady supply of critical raw materials. And actually, the President of the Commission, as you probably know, has announced in the State of the Union speech that the Critical Raw Materials Act is to come. The call for evidence was actually open a couple of days ago on 30 September, and there are 8 weeks until the 25th November to bring contributions on how to strengthen supply chains while maintaining a sustainable level playing field. And I'm very much convinced that environmental regulation will have a key role for this. Just think of circularity, the circular economy, which should actually apply to all raw materials. But for critical raw materials, it's critically important not to waste them. To everything related to recovery, reuse, recycling, efficient use, development of alternatives will be boosted and influenced by the circular economy approach. But wider environmental regulation is also very relevant, critically relevant for critical raw materials, to begin with, to ensure public acceptance from following the right environmental regulations, to identify and avoid trade-offs, to help develop the least damaging technologies or adopt the best available technologies, and to protect, restore, and compensate damage, including for biodiversity. There's actually already quite a lot of guidance towards this, and you'll know better, such as the Extractive Sector Code of Conduct or the Commission guidance document on non-energy mineral extraction in Natura 2000 sites, which clarifies how mining activity can be carried out in accordance with the protection requirements of Natura 2000 sites. But I do think, and this is maybe my main message, that of course, industry and business do impact on nature, but they can, and you'll know better, they can avoid, minimize, compensate, they can restore, they can move towards what's the new trend coming, which is moving towards a regenerative or nature positive economy, where yes, we take from nature, but we not do enough to put it better through the measures we can adopt in our own activity. And also industry has the capacity to innovate, to build the partnerships, and to bring the expertise to find the new approaches that can prevent biodiversity loss and address climate change. I actually am convinced, I've seen somewhere calling biodiversity the next big thing next to climate change, of course, but I'm more and more convinced there's only one big thing, and again, that is global sustainability or unsustainability, and we cannot attain it without an holistic approach as the one of the European Green Deal, and that definitely includes more and more also maintaining and restoring the nature around us. Thank you very much.
For this very clear presentation. Actually, the roadmap that I mentioned, the methodology that we have introduced and developed here in the Swedish mining industry, we call it mining with nature, actually works with this mitigation hierarchy that you mentioned. And representatives from us will participate, as I understand it, in the COP15 in Canada in December. So we're really eager to tell the world about this methodology designed for the mining industry, how to increase the biodiversity in all regions that we are active in. But I have a question for you connected to this mining with nature concept. This is I'd say like a private initiative, how to approach the issue of biodiversity. What role do these kind of private initiatives mean for the bigger picture of biodiversity, as you according to you?
It's actually very crucially important, and I'm actually surprised to see just how many businesses are actually coming forward with concrete commitments and organizing themselves, business for nature, act for nature, with pledges to influence and to bring to COP15. And I think that's crucially important because, well, businesses do influence governments and politics as very relevant stakeholders. So when they treat biodiversity as something really important, that will help the policy making. But I would reinforce, and we'll actually have on the 18th and 19th of October what we call the European Business and Nature Summit here in Brussels. And it is around this concept that should be added to the approach on minimizing and compensating, which is this approach on a nature-positive economy. And I think the keyword restoration, which is inherently positive, it brings hope that we can put back what needs to be put back, can be used very adequately by businesses towards showing they can be regenerative and nature-positive.
Interesting, and I cannot still. I won't let go of this Mining with Nature roadmap. It's been given quite some attraction from interest from other countries. It's actually translated into Spanish and to Mandarin and English, of course. Not yet Portuguese, but time will tell. I was interested. You said you were looking for examples in your presentations, and this conference hall here is full of good examples. There's very competent people here. They could really contribute to give you whatever is needed. You were talking a lot about the holistic change in connection to the Green Deal as well. Sometimes I hear critics say that DG Envy is pretty square-minded and not at all. It has the holistic viewpoint in terms of including a living society in the approach. What's your comment?
My comment is that I disagree with that view. And actually, of course, we have the environmental hat. So we aim at bringing the cursor of environmental consideration more into perspective. But usually the point of departure is one when the environment was largely disconsidered as compared with other goals. As if, let's say, maybe this image can be a good reply. We have often referred to sustainable development as having 3 pillars, but actually it doesn't have 3 pillars. It has 3 layers. It's just the same components: environment, society, economy. But there's only one candidate to be the underlying layer upon which you can build the others. And that's the environment, biosphere, etc. And it's sometimes the lack of perception of the importance of having a viable biosphere delivering its services that may bring some of those comments like of a disbalance. Actually, I think that the GEM is helping quite a lot to bring the balance back.
Excellent, thank you very much. Swedish mining industry, we consider ourselves being very innovative and in many different important areas. What role does it play, according to you, as a front runner in the European industry as such?
Well, the Swedish mining industry is clearly a front runner in the sense of being well developed and having these approaches on minimizing, on working with nature, were rather well developed. So in that sense, this is the kind of example we need. So these industrial players that see is not about objecting to environmental goals and regulations or trying to dilute nature protection or putting aside other concerns, but building on them to still strive on your activity and also delivering the benefits that we extract from the materials you provide. So in that sense, I think the Swedish mining industry can pretty much provide an example, and I hope it will keep that path of a good example.
That's a really good final word. So thank you again very much, Mr. Delgado, Rosa, for your presentation and your possibility to come here with us, to join us digitally. Next time, we hope to see you in person.
I hope so. Thank you very much. Have a nice summit.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much. Biodiversity is only one of the really hot topics in Brussels these days. The Industrial Emissions Directive, IED, is another. The IED aims to achieve a high level of protection of human health and the environment taken as a whole. I'm reading, this from word by word. By reducing harmful industrial emissions across the EU, in particular through better application of the best available techniques. This sounds a bit complicated, maybe, in real life. And therefore, we ask someone who knows every nitty-gritty details about this to come here, to travel from Brussels to Kiruna today. He will explain it all to us, and he will do it in 15 minutes. So please welcome, straight from Brussels, Toon Smets.
Thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you.
And in fact, thanks to the entire Svemin team for having me and for organizing the event. Been some really interesting discussions this morning and presentations. Lots of takeaways from myself, and I also take away that it's perfectly fine to have lunch at 11:30. So I'll tell that to my colleagues. So my name is Toon Smets. I am environmental scientist, and I currently work as a policy officer in DG Environment of European Commission. And so, as the previous speaker, I will give you an EU environmental policy perspective. And in particular, I will talk about the Industrial Emissions Directive and the mining industry. Now, in April this year, the Commission adopted a proposal for a revision of the directive. And as part of this revision, mining activities are proposed to be included in the scope of this directive. So the aim of my presentation is to hopefully give you a better understanding of the reasons why the Commission made that proposal, but also of the implications of that proposal. But first of all, see if this works. Is there somewhere I need to point to? Or?
To me.
To me? To you? Perfect, thank you. So first of all, I think it's important to explain you a bit in like 3 slides what the IED is about and how it works. Because before we talk about what it means for the mining industry, it's very important to understand this directive. It's a rather technical, at times complex piece of legislation. So I'll try to do my best to run through it. So the directive in its current form was adopted in 2010. At the time, it was actually a recast of a number of pieces of legislation, including maybe the most important one, the IPPC directive, so the Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control Directive. This old directive is, in my opinion, perhaps a better name to describe the IED. It's not just about industrial emissions, but it's actually about the prevention and control of emissions to air, water, soil, but it's also about minimizing consumption, resource use, energy, materials, water, optimizing process efficiency, and encouraging circular economy, and as well ensuring waste prevention and control. So it's a whole set of environmental impacts that is regulated by this directive. And as Emma introduced, it's indeed that's the main objective. So regulating the environmental and human health impacts of industrial activities. But by doing so, the directive also aims to tackle a number of other issues. So second one, so next to the environmental impact, is ensuring a level playing field. I'll come back to this later when we talk about the mining industry. Number 3, and that's also an important element, we believe, is this access to information and public participation in the entire process, and access to justice as well. And finally, and this is not only for the IED, but I mean, the Commission takes that very seriously, is to avoid any double regulation, and it's so each and every measure aims to reduce any unnecessary administrative costs. So the IED, what does it regulate? Well, essentially the largest industrial activities in the EU. It's about 52,000 installations. Around 22,000 are, let's say, the bigger livestock farms, so it's the rearing of poultry and pigs. But then the other 30,000 installations under its scope are anything, the big industry, so it's anything from energy industries, metal production and processing, but also chemical industries, waste treatment, and so on. This is in terms of number of installations, by the way. In 2019, 2020, there's been an evaluation of the directive to see how good it works, what are the success factors, what are the shortcomings. And one of the main success factors is actually its impact on emissions. And this one is an example of emissions to air. So what you see on the slide is trend lines of emissions of key air pollutants from industry. Starts in 2007, so over 10 years there's been a reduction of the key pollutants between 40 and 75%. And the idea has been one of the drivers of those reductions. Now, how does the directive has achieved those impacts? So the idea is a permitting directive, and when I say permitting, it's not about a license to operate. It's when you have an activity, it's about having a permit to operate the activity in an environmental friendly way. So it's after you have the license to operate, it's about permitting the activity. One could also say it's a command and control tool. So command, as each and every activity under the directive needs to have a permit in order to operate. And this permit then contains conditions in terms of emissions to air, to water, and so on. As part of the permit conditions, there are also monitoring conditions to measure the impact on the environment and the emissions itself. And inspections as well, depending on the risk of the activity, the frequency of those inspections increase. And all this system together then leads to the reduction of the environmental impacts. And as I mentioned before, this public participation is a key element in the permitting process. And another important element is, and then we come to the BAT, so the best available techniques. Those are, let's say, the minimum EU level requirements on which those permit conditions for each and every installation are being set. So you see, it's a starting point, minimum requirements for the permit conditions for each of the activities. Now, how are these minimum requirements defined? And that's important to understand. It's a different process for each sector. So it's not like the Commission says these are the values that you need to comply with. It's actually quite long. It's 4 years typically process of a technical exchange. So you basically see these bunch of people around the table with one standing up. I'm not sure it's the best illustration of how it works, but it's chaired by the JRC, so the Joint Research Center of the Commission. And you have all these experts from member states, industry, and NGOs working together. It's a technical exchange, so it's not a political process. It's really based on technical and economic data. And the outcome of this process is then what we call the BAT reference documents for each sector. At the moment, we have around 32 of those documents. And it's the final chapter of this often 1,000-page document that is the BAT conclusions, and it's those that are adopted by the Commission and then form those minimum requirements for the permit conditions. The adoption then follows after an opinion of a forum group where, again, you have member states, industry, and NGOs, and a vote by the member states finally. So these conditions, they can contain requirements, emissions to air, water, environmental management system, waste management, and so on. What I'd like to stress here is that this process allows for a variety of activities and conditions of a particular sector. So it's not that when it's in the BAT conclusion that it applies for all the mining activities, which wouldn't make sense. So it's really it allows for this diversity and variation in operating conditions. So this then feeds into the permit that is applied locally. So that's in a nutshell how the ID works. So it's a whole system to come to these conclusions. Now, I mentioned at the start that the Commission adopted a proposal to revise the directive. I mean, it worked well, but there are also shortcomings. And the previous speaker also alluded to the European Green Deal. So also for this directive, back in 2019, the Green Deal also already stated that there is a need to review EU measures to address pollution from large industrial installations. And this then gave a clear remit and need for action to come up with two proposals actually. One is for the ID, and one is for the it's what we call sister regulation. It's basically the reporting of emissions. In fact, mining activities already are covered by this reporting regulation, so they already report emissions and transfer waste. So, and the overall objective of this revision, let's say, is to transform the legislation, so those two pieces of legislation, into a forward-looking framework which is fit to accompany the industrial transformation. I know this sounds maybe a bit woolly and it's EU language, but we've heard it before. I mean, it's a key objective, and this is what I would say, keep in mind for when you see the details of this revision. This has been, let's say, the guiding objective of the revision. In the evaluation back in 2019-20, there were 5 main areas of shortcomings of the directive. And what you see on the slide is actually the same 5 clusters that are now coming back in the proposal. So each of them, tackles one of the shortcomings of the directive. It will be a separate presentation to go through this, in detail, but you have it on a slide. If you would like to have an overview again, you can have a look. But in a nutshell, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 is more effective legislation, so it's basically keeping the same provisions but tightening some screws. I'll give you one example. We have derogations, so there is a flexibility to have less strict values than what we have in the BAT conclusions. This is still an important provision. It allows again for variation of conditions. But now member states can do it in different ways. The way it's granted, it can vary between member states. So what the proposal does is harmonizing the approach to grant derogations. To support innovation, the directive actually is by nature a bit backwards looking. It looks at which techniques are available on the market, how can we set minimum requirements. So it's looking backwards. Now the idea in its revised form supports innovation. There will, for example, be a new innovation knowledge center which will be housed by the JRC, and that center will continuously take stock of the emerging techniques in the sector, and as such inform maybe a future revision of a BREF or a BAT conclusion. You see? So it's not just like how it's now done today. After 10 years, we say, okay, we're going to do something for this sector. No, this innovation center can really inform this decision. Number 3, resources and chemicals. I showed you the graph on emissions to air. This is a success factor, but when it comes to regulating the consumption and the use of chemicals, for example, the idea has been slightly less effective. And in the revision, we'll try to improve this, and one way to do it is to step up the environmental management system. It might include, it becomes a strong requirement, and it might include benchmarks on consumption of resources and so on. 4 is supporting decarbonization. I mean, the directive, it's not its main aim, it's not its main objective to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it has the potential. One of the reasons why it's not been that effective is, of course, with the interlinks with the emission trading systems. Again, that remains the same. So the idea will not regulate greenhouse gas emissions in permit conditions when they are covered by the ETS. So that remains the same, but we will now make energy efficiency requirements mandatory. So. And 5, finally, is the scope, widening of the scope. So in the revision, new activities are brought into the scope. And there are, let's say, 4 types of activities included. 1 is closing the gaps. It's adding some small activities, which, we know there is pollution, but they're covered by some BAT conclusions, some not. So it's kind of loopholes. And 2 is, focus, I would say, for today. So it's really some activities, including mining but also the battery factories, under the scope of the directive, which then, as I said, in the general objective, to accompany the growth of those activities. We will also have more livestock farms under the scope, and there will be a watch mechanism in case, over time, there's a need to extend the scope. Now let's zoom into the second part, the mining activity. So what does it mean? There will be, the proposal is to have a new activity in Annex 1 of the directive, and all activities in Annex 1, they need to comply with the requirements from Chapter 2. I know that sounds a bit technical, but essentially that's the process I presented before. So going through this BREF process, having these permit conditions, that's essentially what it means. And so this activity 3.6, extraction and treatment of minerals and metals, so that would mean around 800, 900 sites that would be included. It's non-energy and it doesn't include aggregates. So if you think back of this pie chart, that would be another 1.52% in terms of number of installations. Okay, so now why did we make this proposal? So we've mentioned it before, previous speakers. The industry is key to the aims of the European Green Deal. Bert also alluded to it. We need those substances. We will need more of those substances, and we also want to be more independent in terms of those substances. So we also expect an expansion and opening of new mines in the EU. However, at the same time, and I'm glad that the CEO of LKAB mentioned it this morning, there's also a sort of not in my backyard syndrome and public concerns of these projects. And we are aware of projects being blocked and even abandoned due to these public concerns. So that's why, of course, an EU response is needed, and that response must, at the one hand, meet the demands of society, and ensure that those are operated in an environmentally safe way. So that's the rationale for including them. Now, what does it mean? I try to summarize it, and this is the last slide, in 3 main areas. What does it mean by adding mining activities in the IED? The first one, and this is because it's the main objective of the directive, is really addressing the environmental impacts, preventing and reducing the emissions in an integrated way. So there is significant potential. We've seen good examples today also on noise, dust. There was a presentation on discharge of water. And of course, the size of those impacts will depend on the outcome of this BREF and BAT process. Number 2, by having this singular set of requirements at the EU level, the directive as such also ensures that there is or facilitates a level playing field for the sites. So this refers back to the BAT conclusions. And finally, I think this governance mechanism, so where you have this whole process of defining the minimum requirements and the involvement of the public in the process, but also in the permitting, in the setting of the permitting conditions, this ensures, organizes participation of civil society, and as such would lead to higher levels of public acceptance. So that's how we see the role of the IED. So it's on one hand these environmental impacts, and on the other hand this organization of the civil society participation. I will leave it at that. So thank you very much for your attention. There's a few links here where you can find more information. So I'm also here the rest of today in case you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really interesting presentation. And talking about adding mining into the system, a lot of mining representatives say almost in one voice that this will be very problematic for the mining industry. What is your comment?
In what sense would you mean is problematic? I assume it's in terms of additional burden you're referring to, is that correct? Well, of course, it will have an effect in terms of, we're not going to deny this, it will have an effect on the permitting system, both for authorities and for businesses. But in the proposal, the Commission tries to rely as much as possible on the existing permitting systems in the member states. And so, as I mentioned in one of the slides, is to reduce as much as possible this burden. So, and I think Sweden is a good example of this. Yeah.
Okay. But you're here. I'm sure very many of my colleagues here from the Swedish mining industry are eager to talk to you and ask a lot of questions. And so I'm happy you're here. And thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thanks to you.
In order to meet the EU's climate and energy targets for 2030 and reach the objectives of European Green Deal, it's vital that we direct investments towards the sustainable projects and activities. To achieve this, a common language and clear definition of what sustainable is needed. And this is why the Action Plan on Financing Sustainable Growth called for the creation of a common classification system for sustainable economic activities, or for short, the EU taxonomy. So the EU taxonomy is a classification system establishing a list of environmentally sustainable economic activities. And it could play an important role here, helping the EU scale up sustainable investment and implement the European Green Deal, as we've been hearing a lot about today. But also what we've been hearing, the devil's in the details. And there is a lot at stake for the mining industry in this. So therefore, Sweden sent the best we could find, the most hardworking woman around. We send her to Brussels to sort things out. Please welcome my former colleague, now LKAB personality, Kerstin Brinnen. And here, I know there are many, you told me there were many secrets. You can't say everything. So after her presentation, I will ask you to help me to ask her some questions and see if we can sort of make her talk. Okay?
Okay, number one is not to drop this headset.
Okay.
And it's constant.
Nobody yet.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Not yet.
No.
But I will call for you in that
Okay.
case. Okay, thank you, Emma, for this introduction. And it's fantastic to be here in Kiruna. And especially fantastic to meet all of you. It's great. And I really hope that you are enjoying your stay here in Kiruna and this exceptionally good environmental summit. So, okay, having said that, I should probably say that for some years now, I have been following the mining sector's way towards the taxonomy. And today I'm going to give you a brief overview of the taxonomy. Like Emma said, no details, I'm sorry for that. But a little bit about why we have the taxonomy and what it is. And perhaps some words about the mining and its possible inclusion in the taxonomy. Okay, so why do we have the taxonomy? I want to zoom out a bit and put the taxonomy in a wider perspective. And you could probably pick a variety of starting years, but I will start with 2016, when the EU adopted the Paris Agreement. And by that, confirming its commitment to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 and to become climate neutral by 2050. And next step is 2019, when the Green Deal was launched, as we have heard earlier today. And the Green Deal is a roadmap for how the EU will become climate neutral, but also it has environmental objectives. And so, in 2020, the taxonomy on sustainable finance was adopted. Sorry, I need to put my glasses on. It will be on and off here. And the Green Deal does not only consist climate objectives, it also consists environmental objectives and how to become, sorry, on and off again. Yeah, how to achieve a circular economy by 2050 and how to protect biodiversity. And the taxonomy will help doing that. The taxonomy is more or less a function, how, or a tool, how we will direct private investments to activities that will support and lead to a green recovery and to help achieve the environmental objectives and the climate objectives. So what is the taxonomy then? Well, it's more or less a classification system. And it does apply to the financial sector, but also to other businesses and their activities that they're undertaking. So the taxonomy is not mandatory for the financial sector. You can invest in whatever activities you want to, but if you want your investments to be labeled as sustainable, then you must invest in an activity that is covered by the taxonomy. And to be covered by the taxonomy, you need to have technical screening criteria that is specifically designed for your activity. So perhaps all of you know that the taxonomy, it's all started out with the climate objectives. We have 2 climate objectives. But the taxonomy does not only cover climate, but also 4 other objectives, environmental objectives. So beside climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, we must make sure sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, a transition to circular economy, pollution prevention and control, and protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. And to be within the taxonomy, you need to be taxonomy eligible, meaning that you need to have technical screening criteria. And you must fulfill both. You must substantially contribute, This is a bit nervous. And actually, I was on the same flight as Maria, so I haven't slept many hours this night. We arrived not early yesterday, but very early today. So it's beginning quite late for me right now. Okay, so starting all over again. No, not all over, but starting by saying that these 6 environmental objectives, you have to be taxonomy aligned. You have to substantially contribute to at least one of them. And at the same time, you cannot or must not do any significant harm to the rest of the objectives. And how do we know that we fulfill that? Yes, by the technical screening criteria for each and every activity that is covered by the taxonomy. And that is why it's so important to be covered by the taxonomy. And actually, the 2 climate goals were aimed for the activities that make the largest contributions of greenhouse gas emissions. And the mining industry was not covered, was not one of them. So we don't have any technical screening criteria yet. Yes. So these technical screening criteria, they are developed in delegated acts. And the delegated acts are developed by a platform that is advising and supporting the Commission. And the platform consists of, it's a permanent institution consisting of 57 members and 11 observers. And it is also supported by some subgroups, of which one of them is a technical working group that is actually working on the technical screening criteria. And to provide some specific knowledge and experience, the Commission can also appoint ad hoc experts that works in sector teams. You can see them beneath the subgroups on the slide. So the sector teams can help trying to define the technical screening criteria for a specific activity, like mining industry or another activity. But they cannot decide on them, but that it will go all the way through the technical working group, up to the platform, and then to the commission. And if it is approved, you will find it in a delegated act. So, what about mining and the taxonomy then? Well, we know that there has been a lot of work to develop technical screening criteria for the mining sector. So far, they haven't reached its goal. In March this year, the technical working group released a report, and in that report, it stated that for some activities, it has been particularly challenging to establish these criteria, and mining is one of them. But at the same time, they didn't exclude continued work for the future. So hopefully the work will continue until we reach an agreement and have these technical screening criteria labeling mining as an activity that can be sustainable if you invest in it. So you can have your sustainable investments. But, well, perhaps I should just give you a short, okay, you're standing up. Okay, so I can say like this. The Delegated Act on Climate was and did enter into force this year, 2022. And for this year, we were also expecting, or perhaps will be expecting, a delegated act on the rest, the 4 other environmental objectives in the taxonomy. And if so, it will enter into force the next year. But so far, we haven't seen a draft yet. And Emma, I'm almost finished. I just want to say this, the road ahead. Well, the taxonomy regulation sets up a framework for how the Commission and all of us should work with the taxonomy and sustainable finance on the criteria and so far. And it gives some details. But about 2 weeks ago, we were reached by the news that 5 NGOs had decided to leave the platform. You remember the slide I showed you on the platform. And what that means when it comes to the platform's capacity to make decisions and its mandate, I honestly don't know. But there are 5 organizations now leaving. But hopefully that will not slow down the development of all the technical screening criteria, not only for the mining sector, but to cover the rest of the environmental objectives, because it's so important. And as we have been repeating this day, we don't have time to do this slowly. We must do it very, very quick. So this was more or less what I was going to say, Emma.
Thank you very much, Kerstin. This is a complicated matter.
Yeah.
Do we have any comment or question from you guys? Yeah. There's.
Yes, please go ahead, but I'm not sure that I can answer. Sorry?
Why do they leave?
Oh, they were blaming the Commission lack of transparency and getting influenced by lobbyists. It was not due to the mining. No, not at all.
Your fault.
As far as no, it's not my fault. I'm not to blame. No, but actually, you can read news about it. I haven't got into the details, but they were not happy with the Commission as far as I understand.
Okay, thank you. Charlotte, that would be the last question because we have to go.
Okay.
Niklas, you can talk
Okay.
later.
We talk later.
Thanks for a good presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And I just wondered, do you think it's possible to actually reach an agreement on all those criteria, and don't a significant or substantially contribute? I mean, now you only talked about one topic. So.
Well, I'm an optimistic person by nature, starting to say that. And as Emma already said, I cannot reveal any details from the discussions, but what I can say is that it's been a very constructive work and work in the spirit of good faith.
Okay.
Very diplomatic. Okay, I believe Niklas, maybe that's a cool course we can have. Please pass on the microphone to Niklas at the back.
All right, or I do it.
No, please use the mic.
Right, thanks. Just to comment on the NGOs, do you still get any NGOs within the project, or were those 5 all of them?
I know those 5 was part of the platform that consisted of 57 members. And then my role has been as an appointed ad hoc expert in the sector team. So it's far from the platform.
Yeah, but my question was, do you have any other NGOs still remaining within the platform?
Well, yes, I suppose so, but you can, I don't know every one of the 57 members. You can easily check them up if you want to on the Commission's website.
Cheers.
Okay, thank you very much again, Kerstin,
Thank you,
for this
Emma.
presentation.
Yes.
Again, and to Kerstin and all other speakers today, we will give a donation to the UNHCR. So please give Kerstin a hand. Great. Please have a seat and we will continue with this panel discussion. We have again handpicked some really brilliant speakers for this session. I would like you to introduce yourselves. We have 3, as you can see, 3 individuals here in the room, and we actually have with us directly from Brussels. Please go ahead, Rolf, and introduce yourself very quickly. Welcome to Kiruna, I should start by saying.
Yeah, hello, Emma. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. I have a bit of a sound issue, but I will try my best to understand your questions and comments. Myself, I'm Rolf Kubi. I'm the head of the European Mining Association, Euromines, and I represent the proud mining industry in Europe.
Thank you, Rolf. And here, live on stage, we have...
I'm Anders Lundqvist. I work for Copperstone Resources here in Kiruna, trying to start a mine here on an old mine site.
And I'm Pia Lindström, Environmental and Sustainability Director for LKAB.
And I am Lars Lundström, the Sustainability Officer of H2 Green Steel, building a new steel plant in Boden as a start on our journey.
Great. And for you guys using the hand mic, please remember to put it very, very close to your mouth. Otherwise the sound goes away. So I'll start with a mining company, if I could call you a mining company, Copperstone Anders. And the start of sustainable value chains is really in the mines. So do people really understand how important you guys are?
No, not really. I think people up here in Malmfälten or in the ore fields up here, they understand what mining is because they have lived with mining for 100 years. But if you go to Stockholm or if you go down to Brussels, I don't think people really know what modern industry mining is today and how we work with the sustainability. So.
What do you say, Pia?
I agree, and I would also say that I think that we are part of the solution is not known. Maybe locally we know about the mining and the companies, but how important it is that we have mines and that we have the mines in areas and in countries where we have high environmental performance. I'm not sure that the world knows.
Turning to Brussels again, I do this is a bit tricky because I have to turn my back to the audience anyway. Brussels, do the people in Brussels know how important the mining industry really is for the start of important value chains?
I think it was rightly mentioned that it's not perceived as being one of the key triggers for the future. But we have an important moment now, a strategic important moment where the perception is changing. There is a recent study that clearly highlighted, and it's very well spread throughout Europe and here in Brussels, that highlights that till 2040, 70% of the primary minerals for the energy transition need to come from primary sources. So it's key to develop mining activities, and especially mining activities in Europe.
Thank you, Rolf. And I turn to you, Lars, from H2 Green Steel. You are represent an important player, or a player to be, really, further down the value chain. What is your take on sustainably produced raw materials?
If I may start with the previous question, saying, do they understand the importance of mines downstream? I think that that understanding is increasing. Because when our off-takers and their off-takers are starting to look at their climate targets and watch beyond scope 1 and 2, and also watch upstream, then they start to understand the importance of sustainable raw materials in order to meet their targets.
Tricky. Does it work?
No.
The green light is not...
It's on and off, I think.
No, you can't hold it. So please, you just push it once.
Aha. It's still on and off. Battery, probably.
I didn't pay
We share.
electricity.
Make it quick.
So, that's a difference. I hope you could hear me previously, but I would say that understanding is increasing. That's my impression, at least, and that's when it comes to CO2. And I think that is a good starting point. And as Pia said, the perspective of the broader sustainability perspectives, like social environment and prosperity, will also increase, and I think it starts to increase. So I think more and more of the actors, players buying the materials along these value chains, it's actually increasing.
Again, if I turn back, thank you very much. But I turn back to my question, Lars. How important is it for you to be able to say that your resources was or is locally produced?
It's actually coming back to our business idea to sell green, sustainable steel. And local produced gives us a lower upstream scope 3 emission. And as I said, that's the starting point, that's the focus right now from our customers. That's why they buy our product and pay premium. So, and the local produce is the key to that, because the local produce is high quality, and it's smart logistics, and everything of these is actually pushing down the footprint. And going further, it will also look at are the raw materials coming from areas where they are also actually excavated in a sustainable way? Do we take care of the local communities? Do we make them prosper, etc., etc.? So local produce, I think it's the future, and also with the geopolitical position or change, I think global value chains will slowly become a little bit shorter. So local produce, I think, is very, very important.
Yeah. Jumping from locally produced till sustainability, I know, Pia, you always stress that sustainability should not only be translated into climate. Okay, there are many aspects of sustainability. Please comment.
Oh, you open up that door. I can talk for hours, but I think that the mining industry, I've been working with the mining industry and environmental issues for almost 25 years, and we have been focusing on land use, we have been focusing on water management and decommissioning quite a lot. And now with the climate change, I would say that the climate change is like a catalyst for all the other issues that we have been working with for 25 years. So they now get more important because they're connected. Biodiversity is connected to the climate issue, it's connected to water management. So I think the climate is lifting all the other issues that we have started working with earlier. But the speed where we need to act on the climate change is much more important now than all the other issues, I would say.
What do you say, Anders? How do you talk about sustainability in your projects?
Yeah, we are in the really beginning now. We are trying to start a mine, and we will start it next summer when we get the permit. And we're working really hard now with the technologies and also with the sustainability matters like the ecological compensation, really good water treatment. It's really practical things that's our base for this. But of course, at the same time, we develop a systematic way of working with sustainability and to see what's really important for us in the coming investments, because we're going to invest almost 4 billion Swedish crowns in concentrating plants and in the new tailing ponds and all that. So we have the chance now to build everything perfect from the beginning, and that's why I'm with the company now to be able to do my dream mine for the future.
Okay, dream mines. How many dream mines, Rolf, do we need in Europe?
I think you are experiencing the sustainable mining in Kiruna, and you are the best place to experience what sustainable mining looks like. My last figures for today are the following. Europe is today producing 3% of the resources that we need for strategic value chains. And we use 30% of the worldwide resources. So you see the huge gap between what resources Europe needs and what it produces on their own. So if we can do more of what you experience in Kiruna, it would be the best.
Excellent. Good point. Yeah. And talking about Brussels, this State of the Union speech that Ursula von der Leyen gave a few weeks ago, and she proposed this Critical Raw Materials Act. Again, Rolf, how will this help boosting the mining industry?
I think since 2003 we are talking about raw materials, but we have to acknowledge that not that much has happened. And it has not reached the president level, the top level, as it has reached it 2 weeks ago. So I'm confident that the Critical Raw Materials Act will make a change. It will not solve all our problems, but it will address the issues of permitting. It will address the question of social license to operate. It will address the issue of sustainable mining, responsible mining, and all of the issues that are needed to secure supply of raw materials. We can't make it all. It will not be a silver bullet for all of our problems. And we will also need to rely on partners outside of Europe and cooperation with our friends outside of Europe, be it Canada, be it Australia, for strategic raw materials too. But we will unlock the potential we have in the EU. For this, we need good exploration. We need more geological understanding of what is the potential of Europe, and we need a fast tracking of permitting to have the raw materials rather sooner than later.
Do you agree, Pia? You represent a large mining company.
Agree to what?
Agree that the what was my question?
Yeah.
It was about will the proposed Critical Raw Materials Act help to boost the European mining industry?
Easy question. It depends on how it's done, I would say. So I don't know, because we don't know how it's going to be formed, but it will show that we need more mines, yes, but if it's going to boost mining, it needs to be constructed that way. And then you have we could talk about the permitting processes. If that is going to be faster with the EID issue, I'm not sure, because in Sweden we have 3 different parts of permits. We have Natura 2000, we have the mining concession, and we have the environmental permit, and then also the EID. I'm not sure. So it needs to be constructed for it, and it needs maybe to make mines overriding public interest.
Are you hopeful?
Yes, I'm like Kerstin. I'm a positive person, so yes. It needs, otherwise we have no chance to save this planet.
Do you want to add something? Yeah?
Yeah, I wonder, is copper and iron included in these critical elements? Because we need copper, we need to increase the electricity production in Sweden with the double to be able to do all your projects. And then you need a lot of copper, much more than you need today. And we can see it's a high price development on copper, and there is not enough with project in Sweden. And if you produce copper in Sweden, you will produce it in a very good way. It's very close to the customers, the big customers. It's also very close to them, so they can supervise us and look at our production, and we can sell it not only direct to melters, perhaps we can sell it to end users directly if we have a very good production, and that can also increase the price for us in the future. So for us, it's, we need to get through, we need to have good permit processes. We think we have good legislation, but we need also to get the authorities up to understand, not to over test the applications in different tracks. So it will be easy. It's quite common that we have double approval of things. That's a big issue for us right now. We have the permit application, and then we have a lot of side processes which are possible to complicate all the process.
Talking about the permitting processes, we've been whining about the permitting processes since I started, working for Svemin, and that's quite some years ago. Anyway, what you are in the midst of these really, what are the most challenging environmental issues for you?
Now, we think the process is, the legislation is good, and we're trying to apply it as good as we can, and we try to talk to the authorities all the time to be able to deliver a good application which will get through. I think the authorities want to have a good example with us, and so we will get through quite easily.
And the mine will open next summer, you said?
Yeah, we say that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're meeting the process, yeah. So exactly, we need it, because otherwise we are a lot of private investors in this company, and put a lot of their own money into this company. We are on the stock exchange. And so be able to raise money on not companies that are not already there. It's necessary to have quick and good processes with high demands. No problem with that. Mm-hmm. But we have clear rules and clear schedules for permitting. That's what we need to be able.
Jumping over to you, Lars. What impressions do you make on the global market? Is according to you, with your company and the fact that you're well-produced fossil-free steel, do you get the world to follow you?
I'm naturally super biased on this answer, but the answer is yes. I think we get a huge impact for what we do in Sweden in general with this green industrial transition. I think it's been talked a lot about it. I think there is a super strong knowledge about 2 relatively small steel producers in Sweden, Hybrid and H2 Green Steel. I was at the Climate Week in New York 1.5 weeks ago. It's a small pond of people. It's not the United States, it's not the world, but most people knew about our projects here. and are super impressed what we do. I didn't talk about the mines that much, sorry for that, but I'm not so knowledgeable. But the value chains that we and Hybrid are in are super well known. And I think the impact we do is, of course, to deliver fossil-free, as Hybrid calls it, or green, as we call it, steel. But what we do is actually we put a lot of pressure on our peers. Hopefully positive pressure. And we also show people in Brussels, people in Stockholm, people in Washington, that this is actually doable. We can decarbonize a super CO2 dirty industry.
Turning again to Brussels, Rolf, do you agree with Lars? How successful are frontrunners like H2 Green Steel and Hybrid in your hoods?
I think both companies and projects with the sponge iron are totally front runners. I call it already the future. This is the future. The bottleneck for those projects are the energy issues and the availability energy at competitive prices. Otherwise, you can completely produce sponge iron from the facilities that are in place. So it is understood. It has arrived to Brussels. Executive Vice President Timmermans, who is responsible for the Green Deal at European level, has been at the plants, has visited, has experienced, has seen this. And I hope more and more people from the Brussels stakeholder environment are going to see those projects. And by having these front-runner projects in sustainable green mining and processing, up to recycling afterwards, we will be also having those technologies being spread all over the world. So it's good. It's technology leadership that comes from Europe, and it is seen and it is acknowledged. It needs more attention, and it needs the support, like I was mentioning, on the energy front to really have a mass deployment of that technology.
Rolf, as you are our guy in Brussels, really, you are our hands and feet in Brussels. I will now turn to the rest of the panel to ask you, what kind of message do you want to give to Rolf, to sort of, what message track should he be carrying out when he meet people in Brussels? Wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
I start. But I think the big takeaway from today, if you back a little bit and look at what the message is, that we need metals. We need metals fast to change the climate curve, and that it's still going up. We have not that much time. And to be able to get these metals, we need to mine them where we have high environmental standards. So, okay, Europe, part of it. And how to get this? Yes, we need to have a permit processes that makes it high environmental performance. It's not that we want to have some kind of low levels of that. We want to have be best performance, but it needs to be transparent and fast and understandable. That is one. And then we need access to land, because we need to do a lot of drilling, and it takes time. And that is maybe something that is unique for mining. We don't only build a house, we need to understand what's in the ground before we can mine it. And that takes years. So both get a permit that is fast and perfect, overriding public interest, and get access to land.
Okay, so I didn't really get what your message to Rolf is. Is that sort of knowledge building?
Fix that.
Okay, received.
Was it understandable, Rolf?
Well received.
Excellent, Lars. Please, what is your message to Rolf? What should he be saying when he meet people
Yeah,
decision
maybe
makers?
from a more of a steel producer's perspective then. And I think the EU needs to work with all kind of levers that are available. It's demand side policy, it's subsidizing that they are now focusing on in the US a lot. But if we were to pick one policy, focus on getting the free allowances out of the ETS. Because a cost on carbon, we believe, is the most efficient mechanism. And then, of course, there's a super tough job for EU as such, also to work with other parts of the world to make sure that this system is actually tight. But work with a reasonable ETS. That's our key message.
Okay, got it?
I've got it.
Taking notes, I can tell. Okay, and
Yeah,
lastly,
okay.
Anders, what is your message to Brussels?
I think Brussels needs to understand that also copper and other metals are also critical for the union to be able to track, to create changes. Because you need a lot of copper, you need a lot of zinc, you need a lot of aluminium and others to be able to create what you want, to build a future without carbon emissions in the future. So increase, put in also the other as critical and make them on the agenda. Not only lithium and others, include other big metals as well.
Okay, good.
Anders, I can reassure you that will happen. Today, the technical screening of the critical raw materials is based on a methodology that is only looking backwards. The Commission has understood that they have to look forward, and copper, I can guarantee you, copper will be on the strategic list, because we are not going to talk anymore about critical raw materials. We are going to talk about strategic raw materials, and copper and aluminium and all of the mass metals are going to be included in there.
Very good last words, Rolf. Thank you very much. We have faith in you and your work.
I hope so. And one key message that I always say, think raw materials first, because we are at the beginning of any kind of product, of any kind of societal infrastructure. I wish you all the best in Kiruna. Enjoy, and I've been there. It's fantastic. Go ahead and visit the mine tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Rolf.
May I say one more word?
Sure.
I want to say thank you for inviting me also, the off-taker in the value chain. But that was not the key message. The key message is that I was super impressed by all these examples. And I was super encouraged about all the work you do, from filling out ditches to actually work with the local business community. And this is what we need, these concrete examples. So I just want to say I'm super impressed and super encouraged about all your presentations after lunch.
That's how we work in the mining industry.
Start working in mining.
Or we work together.
Excellent. Thank you again. Thank you very much. Our final speaker today is co-founder and CEO of VAST, a Swedish company dedicated to taking geomorphic design here to Scandinavia. As landscape architect, our next guy has a unique perspective on the challenges our industry faces today. Today, he will be speaking about the first geomorphic site built in Sweden and how they, during the construction, tackle the challenges. Please welcome, if we get to untangle his hair and give him the head mic properly. Are you ready?
I am.
Because we are ready for you, Matt. Baida.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks for helping sort out the hair. Always a technical issue. I'm going to get the presentation coming slowly but surely, so thanks for the kind words and the introduction as usual. We'll get to this presentation in a second. But lucky last today, so I'm a bit biased, I think, when I say I think this is a great project to finish on. to show some of these great examples that we'll be looking at today as well. So I just want to say that part of today was aligning with, well, this presentation actually aligns with why we're here today, and that's looking at green and innovative action in the north. And I think that's what we're going to show today. I'll start by posing the question, do you think this is a landscape that you're going to visit with your grandkids one day? So I'll leave that for you to ponder during the presentation. You can decide for yourself. But I just want to start with a bit of context. I'm not sure if you're sick of hearing it all day, but obviously we all know in this room we need minings for our green energy transition. However, that doesn't alleviate the fact that very few people want a mine in their backyard. And it's this sentiment that we're seeing mining conflicts across the EU increase. And there's a review of mining conflicts in the EU that states that the top environmental concerns include loss of landscape, water pollution, loss of vegetation, air pollution, and loss of biodiversity. And these elements are all present in over 80% of mining conflicts. And regarding socio-economic concerns, they include land disposition and displacement and loss of livelihood as the top concerns. And I think we can all relate to those mining conflicts here in the north of Sweden. So I'm not here today to preach that geomorphic design is the silver bullet to all of these issues, but I think it can play a major role in helping resolve some of these conflicts. So let's take a look at Scandinavia's first geomorphic landform. So in collaboration with the LKAB, we've delivered not only Scandinavia's first geomorphic landform, but also the first in the EU built with waste rock from an open pit iron ore deposit. So for those who love statistics out there, this is 1.4 million tonnes of waste rock. It's 4.2 hectares. It's got an elevation change of 45 metres from top to bottom. The actual build time was 6 weeks. We teamed up with Sherlin Mining for this construction. Absolutely great company to work with. They're bulldozer operators who finished the site to perfection with Tim and Andre. Daniel Bediston was the project leader, and he had a catchphrase throughout the project which we all loved, and that was, "Hey Daniel, what do you think about this? Is this going to be an issue?" Ingen problem was his response always, which is a great attitude to have because it is a test site, so we're learning the construction of this together. So LKAB have become the geomorphic pioneers in Sweden. So how did they become the geomorphic pioneers? It was to do with a research project we're teaming up together on a couple of years ago, and we started to question, can we do better with the current waste rock management practices that they had? So at the time it was great to raise the question, but we didn't actually have a solution. But however, as they say, the most exciting phrase in science is not eureka, but it's actually, that's funny. And that's the sound of new insights, unexpected insights, and new ideas connecting in the brain. And I had my that's funny moments at a landform design course in Spain when first learning about geomorphic design. And here's when I began to realise that we should be doing better with our waste landforms. Great course. The 3 key takeaway messages for me were geomorphic design is about creating long-term stable landforms by controlling the water through a designed drainage network. If we do this, we actually provide the foundation for ecological recovery and increasing biodiversity. And if we put these two together, we can actually start delivering mining disturbed land back to people and nature. So I was with these, my that's funny moments, that I jumped back on the plane to talk to LKAB, convey my message. So they were receptive to the idea, and we started to explore the approach a little bit further. So we now had an alternative to how we could do things better. So LKAB were interested in pushing the standard of waste rock management forward in the industry. Geomorphic design is classified and recognised as the best available technique in the EU, so why not work with it? So with LKAB on board, we got to designing, and this is a conceptual geomorphic landform for their Svappavaara site. We had to fit 100 million tonnes to fit their current production needs. We had to fit within their permitted boundary, and we had to keep below their permitted height. So with all of these things achieved, we started the discussion about where could we have a test site. So we looked at locating our test site after working through all the issues and opportunities at the northwest corner. Our key design challenge here was connecting to a drainage channel that LKAB had constructed as part of their permit conditions. So the purpose of this channel was to eventually capture all the runoff from the deposit, direct it via the sedimentation ponds and oil separator to be discharged. So we had to move from this conceptual design to a constructible design for our test sites. So what does that look like? This is our design, and you can see the drainage channel along the right there that we had to connect into. So the issue with connecting into this was during high volume events that we would actually see water washing into our site, and we didn't want to have this. But our solution, however, was actually to drain a floodplain at the bottom of our design. So we would encourage water to flow in, fill up and empty out depending on the volume of flows coming down in the drainage channel. So this floodplain had a hydrological function, but also it was intended to be an ephemeral ecological niche to help us increase biodiversity. So as Camilla Esbetti pointed out not long ago, this is sort of reflective of what the northern Swedish landscape does, and it acts as a sponge. It fills up during these large storm events, and then it drains out. So we've decided to work with nature, not fight against it, and that's the premise of a geomorphic approach. And it leads me to another that's funny moments. So Nicholas Bogush was a mine regulator in the US where he went from site to site inspecting why the landforms had failed. And it was this particular site that he was visiting. He looked across at the adjacent natural landscape and he said, that's funny. Why is that natural landscape not eroding? And why don't we just design and build that? So Nicholas has gone on to invent the geofluid method, which is an approach to geomorphic design. He's helped develop the software around this, and we've used this software and his method for our test site. So what is his method all about? It's a lot to unpack, and we don't have the time to get into it today. But for a one-slide lesson on it, it essentially stems from the question that he asked himself 30 years ago, and that is, what is a stable natural landform in this climate? And that's where we begin. We answer that question. What is a stable natural landform in the climate where our mine site is located? So from there, we go out and we visit these stable landforms, our reference sites, and we take specific measurements from that landscape, which are called our landscape inputs. Thirdly, we start designing. We take those landscape inputs, we put them into our modelling work, and we create stable landforms. The geofluid method is not interested in creating landforms that look natural. That's a byproduct of creating natural, stable landforms. So we got to visit our test site. It was constructed at the start of summer, a couple of months ago. And our gracious host, Matti Suominen, took us out for a little fika session on site. So it was at this moment where it's reinforced to me why I get out of bed to do what I do every day. And that is, our company's mission is to return landscapes back to the future generations, usable landscapes for future generations. And after becoming a dad recently, I think this mission really, the importance of it really struck home a little bit further. So it's my son's world now, and no one really cares about dad anymore. And I'm reminded of this fact every time I call home and everyone's like, oh, how's Harry doing? What's Harry up to? And dad doesn't get any questions anymore. But that's life, and I've accepted that. And in all seriousness though, I was on the site thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I could take my little son here, Harry, in 50 years' time and show him what dad's been up to help leave behind a better planet? So what would I tell Harry about the site? I'd probably tell him, mate, this is a single subwatershed. All the water that falls in this subwatershed is conveyed off our site via the drainage network that I talk about. So you see this in the image. The drainage network consists of the valley bottom, the subbridges and the swales. So the water will be directed from the subbridge into the swale into our valley bottom. And all of that combined conveys water without any new erosion. So this has been a test site, and we've had some great learnings, and a couple of those include a construction learning. So we were integrating with the existing 20-metre dumps, which means you can see our design surface there on the left. There's some voids that we need to fill. So we decided we'll test 10-metre lifts, doing our bulk dumping with 10-metre lifts. The feedback from Sherlin was they had to double handle some of the material still, which is what we want to avoid. So their recommendation for future builds will be 4 to 5 metre lifts. You can see on the left, we get as close as possible to our final design surface. And that's what a geomorphic design is about, dumping your material once from the beginning correctly for a cost-effective build. Another key learning has been trying to get a geomorphic thinking and education into the companies as early as possible, ideally before any permits are approved. We are integrating with existing operations at Svappavaara, so it can be done. It's done all over the world. It's not an issue, but outcomes can be improved if this thinking is embedded a little bit earlier into a company's psyche. Quick example, this is the drainage channel that we're tying into at Svappavaara. So essentially it's a straight line ditch cutting through the landscape. So we could do something like this, which is designing a meandering functioning channel with landscape inputs from local stable landforms to create something that is a bit more natural and has the same function. So you can see the main channel running through the site and all the geomorphic sites either side draining into that channel. So it's going to do exactly the same what our drainage ditch is doing on site today, but perhaps is a better outcome. So this is a 700 hectare geomorphically reclaimed site in New Mexico, and it's an open pit coal mine. So again, stems from the question, can we do better? And as our client Matti likes to say, this test site was about getting things 80% right rather than 100% wrong. So there's been some good learnings and some learnings to come. Some of the next steps and new learnings are going to include letting our landform settle for a year, seeing how it behaves during snowmelt next year. We're going to start some sediment yield monitoring, water quality monitoring, and some vegetation monitoring next year. We are going to put our landform covers on, so we've got moraine till and a topsoil. We're going to place them in different varying depths. So on the ridges, we're going to have less. On the swales, we're going to have more depths of soil and moraine, just as we see in nature a little bit more. We're going to place some rocks and some deadwood to create a more natural surface and also help increase our biodiversity. LKAB are looking at test site number 2, where we're going to take all of these learnings and we're going to embed them into those future designs. So I posed a question early on, if you could see this being a landscape that you would visit with your kids, grandkids, and potential future generations, and maybe not looking like this, but maybe something a bit more like this. So what have we done here? We have created a long-term stable landform that gives us the foundation for ecological recovery that LKAB can hand back to people and nature in the coming years. So yes, it's not what was originally there, but a couple of presentations today we're talking about nature positive, and I think we start to achieve that through a geomorphic approach. Thank you for listening. Hope you took a little bit from the presentation.
Thank you very much. Could be done with this kind of landscape or tailings. Is that called tailings or is it just called
waste rock in this particular case?
Cool. But your example here, the test site, that's LKAB waste. Okay, it's inert. Mm-hmm. It's from an iron ore mine. So what is this applicable to sulfuric ores too? If they have acid material?
And it is, yes, you can. It is a question we've had from a few companies here. And I guess the simple response is I'll take you back to the construction learning where we're showing how we build in different lifts. So you're building these structures the same way, essentially. We say it's 90% the same, it's back-end dumping, your dump to angular repose, but we just have different lifts and a different layout for your dump. Then you do the final grading, which is a little bit different, but it's a bulldozer pushing dirt around. It's the same thing. So it's a change for a company, but it shouldn't be a major change. So whether your material is inert or potentially acid forming, you still need to manage that material whichever way your company's doing today. And if you need to manage acid mine drainage, you need to manage that with a geomorphic approach or what we call the conventional approach. So yes,
So that's
it's
it's a
doable.
long answer.
So yes.
But just my final question to you. It looks expensive.
Funnily enough, no. We haven't done I'm still waiting for some cost evaluations, but as I said, it's the same. It's trucks dumping, whether they're dumping in the conventional approach or the geomorphic approach. It's the same. It's the same method. From a planning and production perspective, the evaluation was there's no change in day-to-day operations. The machine operators were just dumping in a new location, essentially. So cost, the same for construction, but then what is the environmental benefits from it as well, and the soft values that we get from it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt.
Pleasure.
For
Thank
your
you. Thanks for listening.
It's time to wrap this conference up, and I will ask our CEO to give us some closing words. So, Maria.
Is this the one functioning?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So, take it away.
Take it away. What a day we had today. I have to admit, first I would like to say that I agree completely with Lars here. I was super inspired by all the good work that is going on in our member companies that we could see during the short presentations after lunch here. And I know that this is just scratching the surface of what you're actually doing out in the companies. But I think this is extremely inspiring and to see that we are really at the forefront of doing sustainable mining in Sweden. And I hope that we can continue to showcase that, especially for you in Brussels and in other places where you make the policies actually that affects us a lot. But I actually wrote a whole slide here on reflections of the day today. And I think we have shown many things here that are extremely important. Simon from GTK showed really that the need is huge for metals and minerals in the world. If we're going to cope with the climate change and the technology transition, we are needed extremely much. And maybe not only the critical raw materials, as was pointed out here in the discussion as well. We see that we need a lot of raw materials. We need steel, we need copper, we need concrete actually. Otherwise we won't have any foundations for our wind power plants. So there is a lot of strategic raw materials that we need that might not be critical from a supply perspective already. And I think that's a very important message from us to the upcoming Critical Raw Material Act and the legislation in Brussels. And as Jan rightly pointed out, and I think also all of the other companies who've been here presenting today, that if you want it, we are here and we're ready to deliver the materials that you need. And we can do it in a sustainable way. We have also seen several examples of how the mining sector contributes to the local communities. Zinkgruvan had a very interesting example of how they work with entrepreneurship. We saw how Kaunis Iron engaged with local entrepreneurs in order to actually build capacity in the local society. And that was also something that was taken up by Lotta Finstorp this morning, how we contribute to this part of Sweden. So I think really that we are ready to contribute here. But we need the regulatory framework so that we can do it. And I think it was Christina who pointed out that the devil is in the details. And that is very much sure, and especially when we look at all the things that are happening on the regulatory scene, especially in Europe, The ID that you talked about, Toon, is one of these things that we have some worries from the mining sector, whether that actually will help us or if it will hinder us in the future. So let's continue to discuss that over a beer in the bar here. I think that would be a good point of discussion. And also that was pointed out by Mr. Delgado Rosa on biodiversity. It's a lot of important things that are happening, and we need to see that the interest of minerals that are scarce and they are hard to find, and we can't choose the location, but we have the possibility of being considered as an overriding public interest where we can actually weigh different interests against each other. So all in all, I think this has been an excellent day with a lot of good examples of how we can work more sustainably, a lot of good examples of what we can actually do in order to just borrow the piece of land that we use for a while and then leave it back to nature. This last example of geomorphic was an excellent example of that. So now Emma looks like she wants to wrap it up and tell us what's happening next here. But thank you very much for coming and engaging. And I hope you can spread these messages not only to us that are in this room, but also to a wider audience very soon. And hopefully next year we'll have an environmental conference that will be even bigger.
Yes. Thank you very much, Maria. Before you leave the stage, I was like, the theme for this year's environmental summit is the green and innovative North. When we meet in 10 years' time, is mining still, do we still talk about green and innovative North in 10 years' time?
Well, then we are the green and innovative North up here, I think.
No, what are the challenges? What are we sort of striving for in 10 years' time? What are we still sort of struggling with? Are we still whining about permitting processes in 10 years?
I hope no. I hope there will be changes. And I think that we are just having these kind of discussions and also knowing that we hopefully we'll have a government that will look into this. Gives me some hope that we will see more efficient permitting processes and more of a dialogue climate together with our authorities and other organizations. So I'm hopeful that we won't be whining in 10 years.
Cool. And by then we will be greener and more innovative North. And South, Charlotte. From Zinkgruvan, yeah. And Zinkgruvan is the next location for the environmental summit of 2023. That was a nice, sort of radioövergång to you. That pretty much wraps the Svemin environmental summits of this year, 2022. I would like again to very much thank all speakers, presenters, and a special thank you to my colleague Linus, who's been, dealing with all the technological, practical stuff here. So big hand to Linus. And if you are to remember only one thing from this environmental conference, I would like it to be the climate transition starts in the mines. And the green and innovative North is a significant contributor to our future stability in Europe. So thank you very much for joining us here in Kiruna today. This concludes the conference part of the Environmental Summit. And my final words will be, as there always are at mining conferences, and they will be in Swedish. Här bryter vi.